Hello and welcome back to Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My. This episode is called Ghosts and Serial Killers, Part 1. In this podcast, we take the entity featured in each episode of the popular show Supernatural and explore creepy real life stories, myths, and legends that surround the theme. So, in this episode, Sam and Dean investigate the brutal slayings of blonde women from an apartment building and discover the demon responsible is the ghost of the first serial murderer, H. H. Holmes. Meanwhile, defying her mother's wishes, Jo follows the Winchesters on their hunt and ends up getting captured by the ghost and buried alive.
A good episode,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
looking forward to it.
Oh, I meant the supernatural episode.
Oh, I thought you meant this episode.
No,
I thought you were preempting how good this one was going to
yes,
be.
it's really good. I've really enjoyed this episode. I think this is one of the ones where this could be like a film.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
if it could be stretched out into a full film,
yeah.
and it makes sense for us to kind of dip our toes into the true crime side of things, isn't it? With this one, because it's given us a nice little link there with H. H. Holmes.
Yeah, ghosts, but still allows you to go into serial killers.
Well, it's scares are serial killers, I would say.
Yeah,
So
alright.
it's kind of tenuous, but so over the next two episodes, we're going to dip our toes into the realm of true crime of the historical sort, with some terrifying serial killers of the past, linking to this theme of the episode. We have two historical heavyweights coming your way, with here in the UK, Jack the Ripper, and from across the pond, H. H. Holmes. And then we finish the second episode with a link to the supernatural with the tale of Lavinia Fisher, an American serial killer from the early 1800s who allegedly still haunts areas of South Carolina to this very day. So, disclaimer, I'm full of cold, so I feel like I'm even more nasal than normal.
Yeah,
I can,
I think we both had it, haven't
I'm in the prime of live.
we?
I can't really talk very well. So yeah, sorry in advance, really. But it made sense to split this theme into two episodes. It was way too jam packed to put Jack the Ripper, H. H. Holmes, and Lavinia Fisher all into one. So I'm kind of splitting it between Britain and America, like I did for the vampires.
Yeah.
Um, so I think when you say serial killer historical UK, you do go to Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, he's definitely the biggest one.
What do you know about him?
From the thousands of documentaries that we've watched on him.
Yeah,
He killed prostitutes. They
yeah.
still obviously never caught him.
hmm
But there's about 1,000 different suspects. I think there's a few main ones that people sort of hone in on.
hmm
And quite a few of them think he's like a really short man and stuff, or quite a lot of them think he's like
Short man.
short eye. One of the ones we watched, we were saying he's like 5'4" and that. But
Mm,
anyway, a few of them, like, well, quite a lot of them believe that he was either like a surgeon or a butcher
yeah.
because he knew his way around a knife.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I think the main thing about Jack the Ripper is it's the fact that he was never caught.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking, well, obviously H. H. Holmes is in the Supernatural episode, so it made sense to put him in the next episode. And Lavinia Fisher is good because it links to Supernatural. But I thought, well, who else do I do really? You've got Crippen in the UK, but I feel like, do you not think, and this is my theory on this one, we kind of, the world romanticizes Jack the Ripper a little bit? You know what I mean? Like, I feel comfortable discussing his crimes, even though they were really awful, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing the Yorkshire Ripper or the Moor murders or something. But I feel like because it happened so long ago, people have distanced themselves from like how brutal this actually was. You know, there's ghost tours, there's merchandise with Jack the Ripper on.
well, he's used in a lot of shows and stuff as well, isn't he?
Yeah,
Like,
but that's what I mean. It's like
yeah, he's sort of
romanticized.
brought in as like some sort of mystical or mythical figure
Yeah.
as opposed to a real life murderer.
That's it, but it kind of dehumanizes him a little bit, I think, in his crimes when actually you think of the women he killed were very vulnerable and very undeserving of this fate.
Yeah,
And maybe it's the prejudice and the element of the women being of a poor class and sex workers that people don't feel as sorry for them, which is awful.
hmm,
Do you think?
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so if you're a fan of podcasts, which you must be if you're listening to this, and you like documentaries and history and true crime itself, you'll know that Jack the Ripper has been done to death a lot more eloquently and accurately than we can do justice. But we're going to give it our go today and just talk about what our thoughts about the crimes. I'm saying that I'm not going to focus too much on the crimes themselves because we're not a true crime podcast, and you know you've probably heard about the crimes. We're going to focus on the suspects, and I've also managed to throw in towards the end some supernatural theories and some conspiracy theories to make it a little bit more interesting.
Nice.
So we'll get going. It would make sense to give a little bit of a summary of the crimes themselves, just to give a bit of reference in case, you've been living under a rock and you've never heard of Jack the Ripper. So Jack the Ripper, he was a murderer of at least 5 women in or near the Whitechapel district of London's East End between August and November of 1888. The case is one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of English crime. Some dozen murders between 1888 and 1892 have been attributed to Jack the Ripper, but only 5 of those, all committed in 1888, were linked by police to a single murderer. The so-called canonical 5 victims were Mary Ann Nichols, whose body was found on August the 31st, Annie Chapman, found September the 8th, Elizabeth Stride, found September the 30th, Catherine Haight Eddowes, found September the 30th, and Mary Jane Kelly, found November the 9th. So those are the famous 5 victims. So according to the common assumption of the time, all the victims were prostitutes, and all but one of them, Kelly, were murdered while soliciting on the street. In each instance, the victim's throat was cut and the body was usually mutilated in a manner indicating that the murderer had at least some knowledge of human anatomy. On one occasion, half of the human kidney, which may have been extracted from a murder victim, was mailed to the police. The authorities also received a series of taunting notes from a person calling himself Jack the Ripper and purporting to be the murderer. So he sent like a letter that was signed from hell, which is where the famous Johnny Depp film comes in.
Aye.
In Strenuous and sometimes curious efforts were made to identify and trap the killer, all to no avail. A great public uproar over the failure to arrest the murderer was raised against the Home Secretary and the London Police Commissioner, who resigned soon afterwards. So, yes, I mean, you've got ghost hunts, tourism, it's in comics, it's in novels, it's in loads of TV shows and films. It really has inspired so much fiction, hasn't it, as well as true
Yeah, I
crime
mean, he's
non-fiction.
used in loads of different shows, and I can remember him from in one show where he was like a supernatural being. I can't think what it's
Yeah,
called. Like, forgetting the name of the
I know
show,
what
but
you mean. I can't
he was like
think.
a supernatural guy, and he was still about, and he was like immortal and stuff. It was
Yeah,
weird.
I vaguely remember that. And also, if you think of the Yorkshire Ripper from was it the 70s or the 70s, I think. He also targeted sex workers as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I think
Well, that's
that's
where he
why he
got the
got the
name from.
name, isn't it? The
Yeah,
Yorkshire
he's like a
Ripper.
rip off,
A
a
Literally a
copycat.
rip off of the Ripper. Um, yeah, so like I said, that was just a brief little kind of summary of the crimes themselves. What I'm going to do now is go through some suspects. I think I've got 5 or 6 suspects for you,
Hmm.
who are believed to be the most likely candidates for Jack. So I'm going to read them, and I thought a bit like last week when we rated it 1 to 5, 1 being very unlikely, 5 being that could be Jack.
Hmm.
I'm gonna ask you to rate them.
Right.
So this I took from a writer called Gabe Pauletti. So even now, more than a century after the gruesome crime spree occurred, the same enduring question about the killer's identity lingers on. Who was Jack the Ripper? Though all involved in the case have been dead for decades, historians and professional and amateur sleuths alike have all attempted to glean the identity of Jack the Ripper to this day. Some theories carry little weight and amount to nothing more than outlandish speculation, but there are a few Jack the Ripper suspects that have legitimate cases against them. Many of these suspects were once likewise suspected by the police, but ultimately most of them were never charged with the murders. Others evaded speculation at the time, only to have their names entered into the conversation years later. In fact, for several suspects, historical evidence uncovered in the decades following the killings linked them to the crimes, though most of this evidence unfortunately came too late. Okay, so suspect number 1 is Montague John Druitt, who was born in 1857 and he grew up quite privileged. He was the son of a local surgeon, and Druitt was known for being a bright child and eventually attended Winchester College, followed by New College in Oxford. Aside from being academically gifted, Druitt was also talented at playing sports, especially cricket. After finishing school in 1880, he decided to enter a career in law, becoming a barrister in London around 1885. Druitt also took a second job as a teacher at a boarding school, but was dismissed from that position in November 1888 for an unknown reason. Newspapers at the time reported that he'd gotten into serious trouble at the school. It is still unclear what the trouble was, but Druitt went missing shortly after his dismissal. About a month later, in December 1888, his dead body was found floating in the River Thames. It was believed he died by suicide. Shortly before Druitt's disappearance and death in 1888, Jack the Ripper claimed his final victim, Mary Jane Kelly. Shortly thereafter, rumours began to spread that the Ripper had drowned in the River Thames. So that would make sense if there were no more definite crimes after 1888 in December,
Hmm.
and he's committed suicide then, just after the final one that they can definitely pin on Jack the Ripper, because there were murders after 1888, but they can't pin that on Jack the Ripper. It could be him.
Yeah, if it was definitely his last killing, obviously it was the last one I could pin on, and I suppose it makes sense if he was sort of well thought of, I guess, for getting away with it. But I
What's that
mean,
mean?
like the beginning part, like a bright child and
Oh,
academic and
so
stuff, being at college and that, so
privilege.
he's
He's
privileged.
above the law.
Yeah, as he said, his dad's a surgeon, so we could have got the skills from him.
Yeah, and he also got sacked from his job at a boarding school, which means he could have been violent with the boys or something worse, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
So who knows? So then in 1891, Henry Richard Farquharson, just looks at Lord Farquhar of Shrek,
got Farquaad.
a member of Parliament from West Dorset, England, started saying that Jack the Ripper was the son of a surgeon who had committed suicide after the last murder. So this rumour mill started to get like spread with quite respected people getting in on it as well.
Hmm.
Before long, journalists, law enforcement officers, and other public figures began corroborating this claim. Since Druitt was the son of a surgeon who had died by suicide in the Thames after Kelly's death, some contemporary investigators began to believe they'd uncovered Jack the Ripper's identity. Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melvin Macnaghten even named Druitt as one of the most likely suspects in the Whitechapel murders in his private memoirs of 1894. So, out of five, Druitt.
Um, well, I mean, based around like all the sort of things that you could probably look at, maybe a four.
Oh, so you think he's quite high up there?
Well, yeah, just because of
Yeah.
obviously he's got a good background,
Hmm.
he'd probably have influence to get away with it.
Yeah.
And then also the fact that, I mean, they stopped after he died. I don't think I don't think Jack the Ripper would have killed himself because of the,
Hmm.
everything he was doing and stuff. I don't know, it doesn't feel right that he would have killed himself.
Mm.
Um, but then also, was he maybe scapegoated?
I was just going to say, was it not a very nice and tidy little, okay,
Yeah, like
let's start
we can
fighting.
calm down now,
Yeah,
public, because
the
the
guy's
killer's
dead.
dead. There's not going
Yeah.
to be any more killings.
It's a bit of a risk, though. Then maybe that's why, if Jack the Ripper did commit other crimes later on,
They were
they,
never,
they didn't pin it on him because
yeah.
they just thought, oh no,
Maybe like we can't have that panic.
yeah.
Somebody go around killing loads of people. Maybe we've managed to pin those five on somebody. We'll pin the next one on
On
somebody
someone
else.
else, yeah. So yeah, the case doesn't really hold up on him. Even though many people at the time seem to have genuinely suspected Druitt, there's little more than vague circumstantial evidence linking him to the murders. Beyond that, Druitt himself was not trained in any medical techniques, something many people suspect the true Ripper was. So just because his dad's a surgeon, he's not.
Yeah,
In addition, some reports even claim that he was either working at his law practice or playing cricket during the times that the Jack the Ripper murders took place, meaning he could have had solid alibis.
yeah. So I mean, if the police actually had a looked into it, maybe they would have found things discounting him. But because he was such a good scapegoat to sort of get rid of some of the hysteria around it and panic. Maybe that's why they decided that. Oh yeah, he's probably a good one to put in on.
Yep, so we're going to go with a four for that one still, or you want to change? Haven't heard that.
I feel like the last time I gave out loads of threes, so I don't really want to give out more
Yeah.
threes, and it is quite compelling because of all like the
Hmm.
sort of thing. Ah, four from given some of the facts, but if you think back on it, a two.
Right, okay. So suspect two, we've got George Chapman, who was born Severin Antonovich Klawowski in Poland in 1865. So he changed his name to sound more kind of, well, more British, I would
Yeah,
imagine. Little is known about his early life in Poland, other than the fact he was apprenticed to a surgeon and later studied at a hospital in Warsaw. According to records, he was a diligent student of exemplary conduct and studied with zeal the science of surgery. In around 1887, he decided to move to London. When he was there, he took a job as a hairdresser's assistant and then as a barber. He also married Lucy Badesky, despite already having a wife back in Poland.
Dirty man.
The first wife attempted to stop the relationship, but apparently gave up after Badesky became pregnant. The couple's son would later die of pneumonia when he was just a baby. In 1891, George Chapman, we'll call him, and Badesky moved to the United States, where they would briefly settle in New Jersey. There, Lucy would later claim that George abused her, at one point threatening to cut her head off and describing where he'd hide the body. After this incident, Lucy went back to London and gave birth to their daughter there. Though George followed her back to London by 1892 and attempted to restart their relationship, it wouldn't last. Soon afterwards, George began calling himself, well, this is when he started calling himself George Chapman, sorry, taking the last name of one of the women he had a relationship with. And from there, Chapman would go on to enter a number of common law arrangements with women who would all go on to die after experiencing stomach problems. The common law wives were Mary Spink, Bessie Taylor, and Maud Marsh, were all later revealed to have been poisoned by Chapman. Marsh's family members were extremely suspicious of her sudden illness and ordered a doctor to take a closer look, leading to the discovery of poison in her system. The bodies of Spink and Taylor were soon exhumed, and it all became clear that there was poison in their systems as well. Chapman was ultimately found guilty of murder and hanged on April the 7th, 1903. Thoughts?
I mean, nah, like a one or a two. Well,
It's not his MO, is it?
no, like
I
why?
think
Like
killers tend to have an MO.
yeah,
He's a
you don't see
poisoner.
killers a lot. I mean, not that I know no killers, but from
Yeah,
all documentaries I've watched, you don't really see killers a lot of the time change from being like killing, like cutting people up and
violence.
stuff in a
Yeah,
violent way with a butcher's knife to all of a sudden poisoning them.
yeah. I don't know. But
And plus, like he was killing all prostitutes and stuff to then go on to kill loads of people he was in relationships with.
yeah, it doesn't feel something about it doesn't feel right, does it?
Yeah,
So thought really quick.
like one, two.
One, two. Okay, so why is he one of the Jack the Ripper suspects? Inspector Frederick George Aberline of London and London Police was quoted as saying, "There are a score of things which make one believe that Chapman is the man." He noted that Chapman had arrived in London around the time that the Ripper murders began, and he left for America around the time that the murders stopped. And also, he described Chapman as an expert surgeon who lived close to where one of the brutal Ripper murders occurred. Supposedly, Aberline was so confident that Chapman was responsible for the crime spree that when officers arrested Chapman for the murder of his common law wives, Aberline said, "You've got Jack the Ripper at last." But while Chapman was undoubtedly a murderer who was responsible for horrific crimes, that didn't mean that authorities had actually uncovered the identity of Jack the Ripper. And not everyone was as confident as Aberline that the Ripper had actually been caught. So does the case hold up against him? Maybe. Though there is little evidence connecting Chapman to the murders, there is no solid evidence to completely eliminate him as a suspect. However, all of Chapman's known murder victims were women who he personally knew, and poison seemed to be his murder weapon of choice. For him to have killed and mutilated strangers with a knife seems to be outside of his usual methods. And while Chapman did indeed have experience performing surgeries, it's unclear whether the Ripper was actually a surgeon, let alone an expert surgeon. Furthermore, it's unclear whether Chapman could speak English at the time of the murderers, something the Ripper would likely have been able to do in order to lure some of the victims. He would also have needed to know Whitechapel well enough to flee his crime scenes undetected. So that sounds about right.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, back then, it would be more like I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to think it on him a little bit more just because he was Polish
Well,
and
that
sympathy like that.
this is going to come up. There's a lot of racism comes into it, and
Hmm.
kind of like what's the word you use? Scapegoat, like a witch hunt.
Yeah,
So,
because I mean, very loosely based it as well, didn't he? Like it's a proper loose basis because he left around the time and he came back around the time or
yeah, I
whatever.
could understand though why that would be a factor
I bet
of
loads. I'd imagine loads of people probably did. He just didn't take too
yeah,
much attention to them because they weren't Polish.
but they didn't go on to murder more women.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so suspect number three, Francis Tumblety, had a mysterious past, though it's likely that this was an intentional choice as he benefited greatly from keeping much about his life a secret. Some accounts say that he was born in Ireland, others in Canada, but in any case, his family eventually moved to Rochester, New York, sometime around 1844. Neighbours and acquaintances described the young Tumblety as a dirty, awkward, ignorant, uncared for, good for nothing boy, utterly devoid of education. That's a lot of insults to hurl at someone.
Yeah, aye, nice.
Despite this, Tumblety did quite well for himself in the 1850s, claiming to be an Indian herb doctor. And by 1857, he had found his way to Montreal in Canada. Though he initially became a prominent member of the community, he was eventually arrested on September the 23, 1857, for attempting to provide an abortion to a local prostitute. He managed to avoid a trial, however, but found himself facing trouble again a couple of years later in St. John when a patient of his died from medication that he'd prescribed. In response, he fled town. From there, Tumblety travelled to various places in the United States in a military outfit, claiming to be a soldier of high rank. Once the Civil War broke out, Tumblety claimed to be friends with the likes of President Lincoln and General Grant, while establishing for himself a reputation as a misogynist with a strong hatred for women, especially prostitutes. After an incident in St. Louis that led to an accidental arrest, he used the pseudonym J. H. Blackburn, not knowing that a warrant had been issued for the arrest of a Dr. L. P. Blackburn. Oh, that's
It's
that's so
unfortunate, isn't it?
unlucky.
It's really unfortunate.
God, he's made up a random name, and there's someone called Dr. Blackburn who's actually got an arrest warrant after him.
Aye,
That's like fate catching up with you, isn't it?
it is. Karma strikes.
So he soon left the United States for London, where he soon ran into more trouble with the law. Tumblety's chosen profession, a fake doctor, or a con artist in other terms, courted controversy wherever he went. In London, he was arrested in November 1888 for gross indecency and indecent assault with force and arms against four men. The charges were euphemisms for homosexual activities. Though it's unclear, what's such a strange way of putting it. Crazy, isn't it? Though it's unclear whether he actually attacked anyone or he was targeted for consensual relationships, which would have been considered illegal at the time, the bigotry of the era could have played a role as to why he was seen as a potential Jack the Ripper suspect. So if he was gay or bisexual or whatever, and that was illegal at the time, then that could have been a reason why try to pin it on him.
Oh yeah, aye.
Foreigners, any outsiders, it's very small-minded bigotry, basically, isn't it?
Yeah.
However, Tumblety himself was known to be bigoted against women, especially fallen women, and allegedly collected specimens of uteruses of every class of women. That's really disgusting.
I'm a horrible man.
Chillingly, but how could you do? How could he do that? Unless he's killed them. Am I being thick here?
Well, he's obviously if he was trying to give somebody an abortion, I'd imagine
Ah,
he's
he's
probably
taken things
yeah.
out. Oh God, that's awful. Chillingly, this would speak to an interest in human anatomy and something he and Ripper would have in common. And Tumblety eventually drew attention for his possible connection to the Whitechapel murders, as he happened to be free on bail when the last murder occurred. If we consider the five known victims of Jack the Ripper, then the crime stopped after Tumblety fled London in late November 1888. But although authorities in London were aware of his whereabouts, he relocated to New York City and then Rochester before dying in St. Louis in 1903. He was never extradited. The theory about Tumblety's potential identity as Jack the Ripper really took off in the 1990s when crime historian Stuart P. Evans purchased correspondence that belonged to journalist George Sims. This correspondence included a 1913 letter by Chief Inspector John Littlechild, in which Littlechild wrote, "Amongst the suspects, to my mind, a very likely one was a Dr. T, who was an American quack named Tumblety." So that's interesting. In the 1990s, a letter came out that one of the top people who looked into it at the time thought it was him.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts so far? If you had to give a number?
So far three, just because I think he's a bit too erratic for
Mm,
someone who got away with it.
yeah.
Like he's very erratic, and if so many of the police and that knew about him, knew where he was and stuff, then I just seem to do up to this point everything that he's done's just been like botched abortion on one person where he nearly got arrested for it. He did something else somewhere where
Mm.
he got pretending to be somebody else where he got somewhere, and then all of a sudden they have a plan where
Hmm.
he's carefully thought out how he's going to murder all of like the same type of like prostitute. Like up to this point, he's
Hmm.
been very erratic with how he's chosen to do stuff. To
Yeah.
then all of a sudden come up with like I mean a plan and how he can take this forward and start doing all this stuff and getting away with it.
I don't know what I think there's something about this one that jumps out to me because you think he's obviously hates women. He he views women as just objects. He's got no use for women. He hates them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If he's been, but he knows the female body very well still. Maybe the presumption is, and it probably is correct, that these women went with him because they thought he was going to be a paying customer. What about if these women were pregnant and he offered them free abortions? And that's how he got them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but surely that would have been reported if they were.
What do you mean?
Would not have been reported if they were pregnant.
Oh, of course. They would know that from the bodies, wouldn't
Yeah, of
they? Oh,
course.
dumb. Yeah, that was a dumb moment.
Yeah, silly.
I keep forgetting the bodies were just yeah, of course. Oh well, it was a theory.
Yeah, you wanted something there.
I was onto something, but it was blown apart within two
Yeah.
seconds. Back to the drawing board. Um, yeah, so they never really thought of him as a real suspect. He didn't. There was no evidence of him being a sadist or anything like that, and he wasn't actually physically violent. The charges against him were bigotry because of him, obviously, having relationships with men, which was illegal at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, was there anything there like that actually said that he hated women and stuff? Like they just sort of said that people said he hated women?
yeah, he was known to be very misogynistic, and his comments were very derogatory against women,
Right,
especially sex workers.
right.
Okay, suspect number four. We're getting there. We are getting there. Thomas Hayne Cutbush was born in 1866 in Kennington, England. His father died when he was young, and Cutbush was raised by his mother and his aunt. He worked numerous jobs as a young man to support his family, but he also studied medicine, often poring over medical textbooks for hours at a time. But in 1888, Cutbush reportedly went insane, suffering from delusions that were thought to have been caused by the syphilis that he'd contracted. Though doctors attempted to treat him, Cutbush became convinced that the professionals were trying to poison him. So he escaped the clinic, where he was held and allegedly stabbed a nearby girl and threatened another. Cutbush was eventually recovered by the police and sent to the Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital after he was declared insane in 1891. He stayed there until his death in 1903, still suffering from violent delusions. In 1894, shortly after the last of the known Ripper murders, British tabloid The Sun, apparently no relation to that of the modern tabloid. I was going to say, I didn't know The Sun was that old.
I was
It's
about to
different
say,
Sun. Released a series of articles that suggested that they'd uncovered the identity of Jack the Ripper and that he was none other than John Thomas Hayne Cutbush. That's a hard name to say. Or is it? Have I just got a cold and I can't speak?
cold's probably affecting you.
The tabloid may not have specifically named Cutbush, but reporters used enough details about who the mental patient was that people would know who he was. In modern times, author David Bullock is so convinced that the Sun correctly guessed the identity of Jack the Ripper that he wrote an entire book about it called The Man Who Would Be Jack. So, thoughts?
Um, yeah, I don't know, no. Two. I
Yeah,
mean, there's not really enough there, is there? Surely.
I think the only thing there is that
He stabbed a nearby girl and threatened another,
and he
but he
liked,
didn't kill either of them, and
he was
he was a
insane.
mental, yeah.
He knew a lot about surgery and bodies.
Aye. But like
Mm.
nothing there to sort of be like, oh yeah, he's gonna go out and kill a load of prostitutes.
I think it's so unlikely because I don't think Jack the Ripper was insane. It takes a very calculated person to do what he
Yeah.
did. He didn't just run off and stab someone like he
Yeah, this
did.
is what I mean, like a few of them have been like erratic behaviours and stuff, and I just don't feel like
He would have been
not at all. Like
yeah.
far too calculated for what he did to
Hmm.
have then got away with it as well.
Yeah, but you're seeing this from a modern day lens where we've got CCTV in every corner. It would be very easy to get away with things in those
Like, but he's
times.
still like, if he was erratic in that, like, most likely would have just been like a thing where surely somebody would have seen a man run away with like blood all over them and stuff because of the finger
Yeah,
and that.
you would think.
Like it would be different if it was just a man who just sort of sauntered past or whatever at
Mm,
any point, or somebody would have seen someone at some point.
He's blended into the crowd
Yeah,
well. He's not just erratic. He's clever
yeah.
and calm and probably normal
Because a
to an
few of these
extent.
probably would have stood out. With this
Oh
one, like
yeah,
if you acting
Americans.
really erratic and stuff, like
Yeah,
Americans,
American.
Polish, and stuff like that. Well, I just somebody who doesn't fit in.
Yeah, I agree.
You know what I
I
mean? Like,
agree.
like if
Uh-huh.
you're looking at a crowd and like somebody's like speaking with like an American accent or a Polish accent or whatever, like, and I think like obviously the
Yeah.
people at that time would have zoned in on them.
You say that, but in London, it was a real like a metropolitan. What was the word?
Metropolitan.
No, metropolis
Oh,
for people, of all different, like a hodgepodge of all different cultures and backgrounds. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
it's like New York, any major city, anyone from a different area, a different race, different background wouldn't have been considered out of the norm.
I think as well though, like everybody would have sort of like known a lot of people as well, like in that area. I feel it's going to be more somebody. It would have been more somebody who could blend in
Hmm.
to the crowd, so
Yeah.
people like maybe knew them but didn't know a lot about them, type thing. Or you know
Hmm.
what I mean, like I don't know.
So apparently, he didn't even match the physical descriptions of the real serial killer because some people had claimed to witness him, like you said. Um, yeah, it doesn't fit, and the police didn't think so either.
Yeah,
So would you like to hear who my money's on?
come on then.
Suspect number 5 is Jacob Levy. He was born in Aldgate in 1856 and he was the son of a butcher. Only one who can ask. Jacob became a butcher himself. On 15th of August 1890, Jacob Levy was delivered to the City of London Lunatic Asylum, Stone in Kent, as an insane person. Jacob's occupation was noted as that of a butcher, and the cause of his illness was mania, in which he'd struggled with for most of his life. His hereditary predisposition was that his eldest brother was insane, and that his expression of countenance was restless. In description, his bodily health was good, and he stood at 5 foot 3 inches tall, and he weighed 9 stone 3 pounds. This is what I was telling you about. Really upset me that a man who was 1 inch taller than me weighed less than me. I need to go on a diet. I need to try harder.
Clearly, this guy was just really scrawny.
Yeah, he was getting his exercise in if he was going around doing what he was doing.
Aye, although this
Um,
probably did help him like disappearing. Because if he was small enough, he could have just quickly slotted down at
behind the
like
lamppost.
down a Suez or something.
So he's not that small. His previous history was that he was sentenced to 12-month imprisonment back in 1886, but was instead sent back to the Essex County Asylum. Additional observations during his term at Stone was that his wife had complained that he almost ruined her business. She said, he also feels that if he's not restrained, he will do something bad to someone. He complains about hearing strange voices, noises, cries for no reason, and feels compelled to do acts that his conscience cannot stand. His wife also revealed that he was formerly a shrewd businessman and that he does not sleep at night and he wanders around aimlessly for hours. At 7:52 p.m. on the evening of the 29th of July, 1891, Jacob finally died at the asylum from general paralysis of the insane, brought on by the serious sexually transmitted disease syphilis, therefore indicating a possibility of liaisons with the Aldgate Whitechapel prostitutes. So it was terrible syphilis. It was like a sexually transmitted disease, but if it was left untreated, it wormed its way to the brain and left a lot of
Yeah,
people. I think a lot of royal members of the family, royal family members in the past contracted this and it's been linked to so-called madness.
yeah,
So was it a predisposition to genetic madness or insanity, or was it the fact that it was a syphilis? Do you know what I mean? It
yeah.
was interesting. But anyway, he died in 1891 and he could have had like relations with the prostitutes of that area who would have been carrying this disease. Jacob may very well have blamed prostitutes for the cause of his illness altogether, with the impending failure of his once successful family butchering business, and he may also have believed or assumed that his children were now syphilitic. At 8:30 p.m. on the 29th of September 1888, Catherine Eddowes was taken into police custody by P.C. Robinson of the City Police for causing a drunken disturbance outside of 29 Aldgate Street, and she was finally released at 1 a.m. Rather than make her way home to Flower and Dean Street, Catherine once again headed towards the Aldgate vicinity. At around 1:30 a.m., three men named as Joseph low end, Harry Harris and Joseph Chaim Levy had left the Imperial Club situated at the 1617 Duke's Place. And about 4 minutes later, and about 15 yards from the club, they noticed a man and a woman standing talking quietly to one another at the entrance of the church passage, which led into Meter Square. Some 10 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was found murdered and extensively mutilated in a dark and desolate corner of the square. The couple observed in particular by Joseph Levy had, as it appears, alarmed him to a certain degree, as he had remarked to his companion Harry Harrison that "I don't like going home by myself when I see these sort of characters about. I'm off." And he further added that the court, meaning Meter Square, ought to be watched. The Evening News for 9th of October 1888 reported that Mr. Levy is absolutely obstinate and refuses to give the slightest information, and he leaves one to infer that he knows something but is afraid to be called on the inquest. So basically, this Joseph Levy has seen what's happened, doesn't like what he's seen, he's headed home, but he won't tell police what he's seen. He said, "I've seen a man and a woman," and they think he's keeping something from them.
Yeah.
But think if what is his second name? Levy?
No idea.
Jacob Levy, the guy we're
Oh.
talking about.
Oh, yeah. So is it a relation?
Yep. So they were convinced that he knew something. At the inquest, Levy admitted observing a man and a woman at the entrance to Church Passage, though he did not take any particular notice of them. He did describe the man as having been 3 inches taller than the woman. Eddowes and Jacob Levy stood 5 foot and 5 foot 3 tall. And when pressed under cross-examination, he denied thinking her appearance as terrible and went on to add that he was not exactly afraid for himself. I don't know what that even means. So therefore, could the butcher Joseph Levy have in fact recognised his neighbour and relation, the butcher Jacob Levy, as the man he had seen in the company of a woman who he may have presumed to be a prostitute, and maybe he was scared to mention it because he thought he was going to get him in trouble
Aye.
for not only being the potential murderer, but if he says that, his wife's going to be like, "Well, what have you been doing with prostitutes again? You know
Yeah.
what happened last time."
Aye. Aye. You know what you got the last time?
Uh-huh. Finally, and just under 6 weeks later, after the Eddowes murder, the witness, George Hutchinson, had reported that he'd seen a man of a Jewish appearance accompanying Mary Jane Kelly on the night of the Miller's Court murder, and who he thought of seeing once again a short time later in Jacob Street of residence, Middlesex Street. Sorry, I feel as if we're out of it tonight, but we're both loaded with cold, aren't we? So we're plodding through. Give me a verdict.
On him. Oh, probably a 3 or 4, 3.5.
I think it's a 4 or 5 for him. I think he's got Jack the Ripper written all over him.
Nah, again, the whole madness thing.
Yeah, oh yes, we did say that. It's got to be someone a bit more.
I just don't think he's like who do like all these ones. They're just, I don't know, how like are they calculated enough? Because I feel like for a lot of them, like their sort of crimes are based around, like sort of losing the tempers and that. Whereas I
Hmm.
feel like Jack the Ripper's was a lot more calculated.
Definitely. And the last one, I'm going to whiz through this one. Aaron Kosminski, he was a Polish-born immigrant, again, other targeting immigrants. He was a barber, and again, struggled with insanity.
Yeah,
So, these suspects that are coming through, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think it would be someone who's got no control over the mind.
definitely seemed a lot more like for how he did it and getting away with it, and it
Hmm.
would have been a lot. Surely it would have to have been a lot more thought out.
Definitely. So, would you like to move away? We're going to finish off with a little bit of conspiracy and supernatural, just to finish us off.
Yeah.
So, have you heard the theory of Lewis Carroll?
No,
So, who's Lewis Carroll?
I don't know.
Come on. Lewis Carroll, he wrote a really famous children's book, Alice.
What, Alice in Wonderland?
Alice in Wonderland,
Oh,
yeah. So Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland,
well, he's a
was
suspect.
well, it's very tenuous, very tenuous. He wasn't. It's a bit of a conspiracy theory. Um, he's not a great guy. Do you know where the Alice in Wonderland comes from?
There's a dark reason behind it, isn't there?
He used to take a little girl out. He was obsessed with a little girl called Alice when he was like a grown man. He'd take
Yeah,
her out on boat trips, and it was very, very sinister. I'm not going to imply anything there, but you know what I'm saying.
yeah.
So and apparently when he was a boy, he was abused by older boys sexually at boarding school, which can often happen, especially in those days. So apparently he was very like angry about this, which would maybe make sense why he's went on to abuse someone else,
Yeah.
allegedly. And a lot of his anagrams in the book, some people have picked them apart, saying that it's things like "I'm a murderer," but I don't think I really believe that. I don't think he was. I think he was a bit of a sketchy person.
Yeah.
Excuse me, it's catching. So is my favourite one, The Royal Theory. And I took this from unredacted.com. Hundreds of books, films, and documentaries have speculated on the killer's true identity, offering countless theories like the ones we've just went through. Of all these theories, arguably the most influential and famous was first posited by author Stephen Knight in the 1970s. Knight spun an elaborate tale of conspiracy at the very top of British society, the royal family. He claimed that the Ripper's victims were really killed to cover up a scandalous secret marriage between the Queen's son, Prince Albert Victor, then second in line to the throne, and a Catholic prostitute named Annie Elizabeth Crook, who bore Albert's child. Knight got much of his information from Joseph Gorman Sickert, who claimed to be the illegitimate son of painter Walter Sickert, himself also a Ripper suspect. Gorman recounted the story to Knight as told to him by his father. Sir William Gull, a noted physician and purported high-ranking Mason, we know stonemasons, Freemasons are a little bit sketchy,
Aye.
actually committed the murders with the help of accomplices in order to eliminate everyone who knew of Prince Albert's secret marriage. So it was actually this physician and high-ranking person within the nobility knew that Queen Victoria's son was had a secret legitimate child,
Yeah.
and they had to get rid of the other working women who knew her and knew of the story, so they disguised it this way.
Oh, yeah.
Despite many of the known facts contradicting this story, the royal conspiracy proved immensely popular, inspiring many other authors in numerous films and books. From Hell, a best-selling graphic novel by Alan Moore, used the royal conspiracy as a starting point to weave a wider and deeper tale of madness in films starring Christopher Plummer, Michael Caine, Johnny Depp, also centered on Knight's thesis. Were Jack the Ripper's victims really killed to cover up Prince Albert's secret marriage? Ultimately, the theory lacks real, verifiable documentary evidence to back it up. It is almost entirely based on hearsay, rumour, and speculation, much of which can be shown to be false. Knight's theory is a seductive one, and its sensational nature perhaps makes people want to believe the truth behind the most famous of unsolved crimes. But it fails on most crucial points and remains little more in the end than a good story. Verdict?
I mean, I don't believe that would be the sort of one, because if they were going to do that, would it have been so spread out, the killings and stuff? I mean, maybe if they were
What
trying
do you
to,
mean?
like, because the killings obviously happened across a few years.
Mm.
Whereas if he wanted to go and get rid of a load of people who knew information, surely you'd have to get it done quick.
And
Because as soon as they
discreetly,
realised
surely.
all the people who knew this secret, surely after a couple of them, the rest
Yeah,
of them would have been like, hang on a second, everybody who knows this secret dying, I'll tell
yeah.
somebody else and it'll get out.
I don't
So,
believe it. I think if
yeah,
you're going to do that, which you would do it very discreetly and make it look like it was a robbery or
yeah.
something, not
However, I do believe, um, as I've said, this
this
one's
kind of
more believable
person.
because this
Yeah,
type of person is more believable of it being calculated
and
and
motive
knowing
driven.
exactly what
Yeah,
to do
uh-huh.
and it motive driven
Yeah,
around a certain reason as opposed to somebody just having a mad thing and going nuts.
yeah. That would make sense. And sometimes serial killers have spurts, don't they, where they're active and then they lie dormant for like years.
Yeah, exactly.
So to finish off, I thought it would be only right to maybe nod towards the supernatural suspects. Some people have claimed time travel, that it could be someone who's time traveled to different periods and has committed the crimes, which I love the idea of.
Yeah,
Bit creepy though.
love the idea of a
I just love time
time
travel.
traveling serial killer.
Yes, the time traveler's wife. That's the next book in the series. No, I do. I think that's an interesting idea. What about different alternate universe, slipping between different universes to get away?
No,
A ghost or a demon?
I mean, maybe a demon.
Yeah,
Not
or
a ghost,
possess
but
someone
like
who's
yeah, like
possessed.
a demon.
Yeah,
Want to go around, but yeah, kill a load of a demon killing a load of prostitutes is probably in a good few films, isn't it?
yeah, maybe. So we don't know, do we? Is the top and bottom of it?
Yeah,
We're,
Jack the Ripper,
we're
probably the only one who
no
would ever actually know.
and we're no wiser than we are when we were at the start. If anything, I'm more confused.
Yeah.
So on that note, thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Ghosts, Creatures and Scares. Oh my, you've stayed with us if you're listening so far. We're kind of feeling very sorry for ourselves with a cold, so we'll be back more beat next time. I do promise, with some more kind of hopefully light-hearted, not feeling so sorry for ourselves attitudes. But if you'd like to stay updated, please do give us a follow on Instagram.
Next time, we'll continue with terrifying stories of historical serial killers. See you soon. Hello, and welcome back to Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My. This episode is called Ghosts